So Flagstone origami tessellations are a specific type of tessellations where the twists match up with the boundaries of their neighbors and fill the entire space, like tiling a floor. And this is a very attractive form of origami tessellations. It was developed a lot a decade or two ago by Peter Keller and Joel Cooper, among others. And there's some techniques that are specific to flagstones that you don't see in other origami tessellations, but other techniques are exactly the same, just closer together. So today we'll be doing one of the second type, exactly the same, but closer together. And stick around to the end where I'll show a variation on this pattern that uses the number line of square twists that I taught the other week, and also give a preview of the rest of the videos in this series. So I'm going to be working on a 24-fold square grid today, and we're going to be folding this tessellation here, maybe even the same exact amount of it, but I didn't count to check. So we're going to start by folding a closed square twist in the center, and we're going to be alternating closed and open square twists on opposite sides of the paper. One key feature of flagstones is that they have these bars that are typically a single grid spacing wide that go between two twists. So that's what we'll see in most of our tessellations, with the exception of next week's. So starting off with that closed square twist, I'm going to find the center of my paper by folding in half one way and then the other. And that conveniently gives me 3 of the 4 mountain folds that I need to fold this twist. And I'll put in one more. And I'm going to rotate this right-handedly. So my valleys will be above the mountains on the right-hand side. And I'm going to make sure that those valleys are on grid lines one spacing away. And I'll rotate this into place and squash this twist. Now, if you feel like you need more practice with the just setting up twists and using this structure of alternating squares, I do have a video on alternating square twists, and I'll make sure to put a link after we're done here. So it's the same idea, we're just doing these very close together. So we've got our closed square twist. We'll flip over to the other side. And by the way, the recording will be up afterwards, so no need to worry about rushing to keep up with my pace in the moment. You will be able to pause me as soon as the recording is done. So instead of using tube pleat spacing, where the mountains come to meet each other, we want to have our pleats overlap. We want to have our valley right next to the folded mountain. This is going to put the corner of our open twist right in that closed hole. And then our mountain one spacing further, which identifies our target square for our open square twist. So like I mentioned earlier, this pleat's going to fold down on top of the previous pleat, and both our vertical and our horizontal pleats, specifically the mountains, need to jump a spacing as they cross our target square. So this will be very dense spacing in here. And we'll be able to set up our open square twist. Once we've got it set up, we can go ahead and squash. So from here, we want to go around the center, adding new twists one at a time. And I'm going to flip the paper over because we're going to need to add our next one on this side. And from here, I need to choose, do I go this way or do I go that way? And I'm going to take the second option and rotate around here because I can see that this pleat is ever so slightly, one grid spacing, shorter than this pleat. It's more clear over here that this one is longer. And by starting with the shorter pleat, we prevent our new pleats from going through existing twists. And this will be more useful when we have more twists on the paper. So from my alternating squares video, we know that each of these two squares has a position of fourfold rotational symmetry in its center, which means that all of the corners of the closed squares are going to come to the corners of the open hole, which means that their centers are one spacing further out. And since we're alternating twists on opposite sides, we need to reverse the next pleat overlap. So we're going to have a pleat running vertically up through here. Its valley is going to be right there. Again, valley comes to the corner of the twist. And we need to run that pleat through first. So I'm going to pop down. So I'm opening the top pleat, popping down the valley, running that valley and mountain all the way out to the edge of the paper, getting them all the way closed, or trying to, as I bring up the remaining mountains. Notice I'm keeping hold of the existing pleat from the open square. My new pleat will wrap around it. So we've got one here and one here. We really do need to get these other pleats of the closed square in place before we can fully close that pleat going vertically up. And it's going to tuck under, and we're going to basically be combining this horizontal pleat and this horizontal pleat to make a double depth pleat underneath. So there's really no way around it. If we don't do this, we're going to be squashing the existing twist in, or existing pleat inside of our new twist. And this will be a familiar maneuver at less dense spacing for those who have seen the alternating squares video. So now we have a pleat overlap and we need to flip over to resolve it. Our target square will be at the top of the pleat overlap. And we need to outline that target square with mountain folds. And by the way, the paper that I'm using is Skytone, especially if you're doing Flagstone tessellations, you're going to need a strong paper. And this paper is really nice. You do want to get the lightest weight though. The 60T weight is actually pretty similar in properties to elephant hide at a much lower cost. So with our second twist in place, I'm going to grab these pleats at the bottom with my right hand and flip them over so they're on my right hand side. And I'm going to repeat the last 2 twists. So I'm finding the center of my next closed square, starting to bring that up. I really want to emphasize the valley and the mountain going up to the top, reordering the pleat that they're crossing. The pleat down below is going to wrap around the already existing pleat. We're going to get our vertical pleat fully in place and then let that existing horizontal pleat close again. We might need to iron this out a little because that is really crunchy spacing, and get that down. So once again, I'm going at a speed that will be better to fold from the recording. And then flip over again. I'm gonna open this up enough to make sure I didn't crunch anything. So that's all in the right place. And my new open square twist is on this side. I'm going to open up the pleats so I can get my proper mountains and valleys in. Making sure that the existing pleats are staying in place. And squash. And that's really the move I'm going to do the whole way around. We'll see 3 twists on this next edge, and that repetition is what's needed to do the whole thing. So flipping over, taking these bottom pleats in my right hand, flipping it to my right hand side, I'm going to start by setting up the pleat reordering up top. So I'm running my valley from the corner of the latest open twist vertically up, and I'm reordering just the first overlap. So I'm getting that valley and mountain firmly in place even before I set up my remaining pleats. And I'm trying to work on the table as much as possible. And notice I've got a snarl in there. I'm going to need to open that up, make sure that valley is running through on the grid line, all the way out to the edge. Make sure everything is clean in there. I might need to do some pinching from the back as well to get that all the way in place and squash my new twist. So this is what is hard about this Flagstone squares pattern, that you've got to do everything really crunched in close together. Then flipping over, I need my new open square. And what's different this time is that I have another pleat down below it. So I'm going to reverse the ordering on that pleat as well. And if you see here, I'm going to have the valley come down from that central closed square, from where the corner of the twist is going to be. And it's going to pop down the existing mountain and run all the way out to the edge. The mountain will follow it. and we're going to end up with a double depth pleat out to the right. So all of my corners are kind of doing weird things. So this is difficult squashing territory. Then I need to come back to that pleat overlap, going to flip over, and I'm going to go ahead and rotate that to my right hand side so it's easier to work with. And I need to open this up and put in my new closed square twist. Okay, so now we've got our first ring around the center. We've got our first 4 squares of the flagstone, and it's time to continue going around. We're basically going to do the same thing, but more repeats on each side. And so I'm going to start with this set of parallel pleats. They're all exactly the same because I have a 4-fold rotationally symmetric position in the center. So I'll start with this set. I need to start on this pleat that's the shortest. And that means I need to start with an open square because this is coming from a closed square. So I need to flip to the open square side, and I'm going to be working on this top pleat. I know the valley needs to come down from the closed square hole. And when we open this up, I need to be careful that I'm only reversing the first pleat overlap. So I'm setting up this pleat that goes down, and I'll make sure that I get my vertical in the other direction as well. And then my horizontal wants to come here, but we also need to close the pleat below. So that's going to end up being double depth. And then we can finish setting up our twist. And there's a bunch of layers under this point, so don't worry if you feel a bunch of layers there. It's just another thing that makes these twists harder to squash. And then flipping over, we need to open up and set up for our next closed square. And we need to reverse that next pleat overlap above. Our valley is coming through up here. And notice that even with a lot of expertise in tessellations, even with really good paper, I'm getting some crumpling going on. This is just really hard to do cleanly. And then I'll flip over and we'll finish this set of parallel pleats with an open square twist down here. To shift that vertical as well. And there we have another open square twist. So now it's time for the next set of parallel pleats. We just did these, and it's time to come down here. I'll rotate them to my right hand side. The shortest one is coming off of an open twist, so I need to flip over to the closed side. the valley is going to come up from the open square hole, and I'm going to reverse just the first pleat overlap. And one of the reasons why I'm running that pleat through first before I set up everything else is because it's going to have more pleat overlaps afterwards. And so if you want to get a cleaner fold, you generally want to be running the pleat that has the most overlaps on it through first. And then of course it came undone, so I need to reset that before I fold the pre-existing pleat on top. And squash. Then I'll flip over again, and we've got another open square twist. And at this point, it can be a little hard to tell what to work on next. We need to open it up and see what overlap is actually the closest one to the two twists that caused it. So that's going to be this one here. And we've got a bit of a challenge because we have actually not one but two pleats in here. So I'm going to open the one that is higher up. I'm going to leave this bottom one closed. I'm going to need to tuck it under that layer to do that. And then the valley comes down from the closed hole. And I reorder just the top but not the bottom pleats overlap. And there I can get my new open square. And flipping over, I need another closed square. So open her up. This time I only have one pleat overlap, and I'm going to reorder it. And that sets up my closed square. And I can go ahead and squash. So really there's nothing new in this tessellation. It's just harder to do, or I should say relative to some other tessellations that I've taught. It's just harder to execute because everything is so close together. And the best way actually to get the skills for doing this is my upcoming course on tessellation starter sequence that has 50 recorded videos. And actually while I'm here, well, I'll continue my train of thought. And so we do a tessellation very similar to this, but spaced out an extra spacing. And we actually cover it for 2 lessons because it's such a universal technique. So I'll put the link to that down below. Right now there's a wait list, but it'll be opening up at the end of the week. So one of the things that I noticed when I was doing this edge is that it was annoying to open the pleat that had been stuck underneath. So I'm going to go ahead and make things easier on myself by tucking these pleats under. And I'll move on to the next set of parallel pleats, moving them to my right hand side. This will be an exact repeat of the previous edge. So starting over here with a closed square twist, running that valley and mountain all the way up through. Notice this is really torquing this twist on the inside. And we want to relieve the pressure on that twist by finishing setting up our new twist with this pleat closed. And now I'm not tucking the open twist under anymore. I'm just wrapping that open twist on the outside of our new pleat because of the reordering that I wanted. And then I can resolve the tension on this inner twist and squash the new twist. So notice each of these down here is not one pleat, it's two. So that'll be a common theme that we see moving forward. Flipping over, I need my new open square. And here I'm setting up some of the, so I already have two of the pleats. I went ahead and set up the third before I push down this valley. So that it would feel more natural now to close down on top. Got to make sure that I don't have a lot of wrinkling under here. So squashing helps to avoid that, and also going in with the bone folder, making sure that that valley in there is actually on the grid line. And here I've accidentally folded my previous closed square in half. So I need to make sure that that is in its proper place. And now I have a pleat overlap where I need a closed square twist. And here it is advantageous to wrap the open square under, or I should say inside of the new pleat, because we're going to need that double depth. But we can put it in a better order for us to work with after we've finished the open square on the other side. So then flipping over, I need this open square. And so I'll bring up the pleat for the open square, and or I should say the horizontal and the vertical. I don't have any more pleat overlaps, so I can just squash this twist. So this is the pleat that we tucked the open square into, and so we're going to tuck that back under in the other direction. You can see now how vital it is that all of your grid spacings are exactly the same. So rotating around once more to complete the ring around the center, we're going to be doing this set of pleats, starting with the shortest one, which needs a closed square on the back. And so we'll set that up and notice how I'm able to wrap this around to set up the new square and squash. And I'm squashing on top of really variable thicknesses of paper, but I would not recommend pre-creasing this tessellation because that's going to be even harder to get everything in the right place unless you set it up like a water bomb tessellation type thing with all of these closed squares spiking up and then squash them each in turn. But if you just have the crease pattern without the grid, you're kind of screwed for this one. And then flipping over, I'm going to set up the next open square, running that valley all the way through, and then doing the double depth pleat underneath. And again, I want to be extra cautious that my valley is actually running on the grid line, that it's not being hijacked by something else going on. Get that in place and flip over to set up the next closed square. And this one I will tuck that previous open square up into the mountain of the new pleat because I need the double depth for the wrap. Well, effectively a wrap, the pleat reordering. And flip, and we'll do another open square. I can go ahead and bring this corner of the previous open square out. I need to run my new valley down. And get everything into place before I can squash. And so if I'm getting some crinkling in the squash there, I can reach from behind with my bone folder and iron that out. And the same goes for this upper corner in there. Still got a little wrinkle, but that's okay. And then I've got my pleat overlap yet that needs a closed square twist. And I'm going to keep going until I run out of grid. So you'll notice that the tiling breaks, so these places where I'm stopping with a ring around the center, are not lined up with the repeats of the flagstone tiling. They're actually aligned diagonally to them, because what they're aligned to is the alternation of open, closed, open, closed. So if you wanted to make this tiling and have a nice border, not have like this jagged thing that I've got, then you're going to want to use a rotated grid. And I'll make sure to link to that video as well. And you're going to need a crease pattern to be able to use the rotated grid. So starting off, I'm going to pick a set of parallel pleats And this time I'm going to start on this side because the short pleat is coming from a closed square. And I've noticed that all of my pleats are tucked under their respective closed squares. So that's a good ordering for now. And I will set up this this open square. And we're getting out to the corner, and I'm going to have that out to the edge. And I'm going to need to squash a little in the air to get that corner going in the right direction. And then I can squash all around. Then next up, and so we're filling in 3 squares on this side. Next up, I've got the closed square on the back. And like I said before, it's the same technique, just more of it. And I need to be careful to keep that valley folded. That's right at the edge there. And we'll squash the closed square, then flip over, open the pleat overlap to set up the new open square. I need to open the next pleat so I can reverse the order. One thing that you'll notice is that we always have this tube running out whenever we finish a open square. And then flipping over, I'll set up the next closed square. Making sure to tuck the pleat off of the open square up into that mountain so that when I close the vertical, that double depth horizontal isn't interfering with things. Then I can squash the closed and flip. And now I'll tuck the horizontal back under that square. And I don't have any more overlaps as I fold this last square in the in this edge. So whether you're using a rotated grid or not, I do recommend folding in this order. Then I've got my next set of parallel pleats, and we're going to start on the closed square side. And here I'm only going to get a partial twist because I'm so close to the edge. I'm going to get half of my closed square. Then flipping over, I've got that same open square that I started with on the last edge. That's going to have its corner come exactly to the edge of the paper. And then flipping over, I can get my next closed square in place. And again, I want to make sure that that valley from my open square is firmly in place as I set up my closed square, or I should say valley from the open square perspective. It's a mountain over here. Or I could be talking about the valley, that's not the pleat, but the square itself. Either way, we want them all in place. Then flipping over, I need my next open square. I've got some crunchiness in here, so I'm going to investigate. Okay, that's where the crunchiness was coming from. And I can squash my twist. I'm going to make sure to tuck this underneath. Flipping over, got a new closed square. Oh. And it often does go easier if you put the valley in that you're reordering the overlap with first. Tucking the open square up into the mountain so I can have that double depth pleat from the reordering. And flip over. I can go ahead and tuck that pleat under. Have my new horizontal come out here. And squash the new twist. So you might be noticing that things seem to be moving more smoothly for me now that I'm getting out to the edge, and that is somewhat true, but it's mostly a matter of getting into a rhythm while folding the tessellation and being able to recognize situations that you've seen already. So when I'm in these positions, I'm seeing how I did the previous time I needed to do a open square from the pleat overlap. And I can use those same movements every time it comes up again. And then flip. Got a bit bound up in there. I'm going to run the valley up, close the mountain, tuck the open square, and close the double depth pleat. And flip. And so I shift this pleat and I can tuck it under the open square, and I set up the new horizontal and open the pleat below to pop the valley down through, close the mountain, close the horizontal with that double depth. Then make sure everything stays on grid lines as I squash. And flip, open. That's where the extra thickness came from. Open the overlap, run the horizontal, tuck the open square up in, open the pleat above, run the valley and the mountain, Make sure that open square stayed tucked. And I can go ahead and smooth that out and squash the twist. And flip. And so I'm opening the overlap, leaving the previous pleat, tucking it under, running the new horizontal, both mountain and valley, running the new vertical, and squash. And we've got another edge yet on this loop around the center, starting with the closed square side, where we have a partial square twist. And I'm going to make sure that that valley was actually on the grid line. There we go. Now it's squashing well. And flip, open the overlap. I don't have an existing plate to tuck. I'm going to run the vertical and the horizontal. It's kind of going to take care of itself. I can squash the more secure corners first before heading out into that kind of free-floating corner that's right on the edge of the paper. Then flip over, open up the overlap, set up the new horizontal, set up the new vertical, make sure everything is tucked in place before I set that double depth pleat firmly in place. And squash. And flip. We're almost there, I promise. And we're going to not erase that plate. We're going to tuck it under the existing open square, set up the horizontal, set up the vertical, tuck it underneath, and squash. So yeah, the paper's really taking a beating here. I definitely recommend Skytone or elephant hide for this. Flipping over, I'm going to have my new horizontal, my new vertical, get those all in place, and I can squash my new twist. And flipping over, this time there is another pleat overlap after this open square twist, because we need that partial closed square on all four sides. And that partial square is just gonna tuck under. The double depth means that that two spacings closest to the edge is just gonna lay down flat. And we'll flip back and turn that grid line one spacing in from the edge into a valley fold, which incidentally puts the mountain right on the edge, and get our partial square. And now we need to move on to the next set of parallel pleats. There's not enough on the shortest pleat to put a closed square. Its corner would be here outside. And so I'm going to flip over and set up a partial open square really relying on this vertical pleat to set things in place. And then flip and set up the new closed square. And here again with the partial twist, I need to make sure that that little flap is in place before I squash, or things will get a little bit funky. And flip. And here I am going to get a whole twist. So I set up my horizontal, reverse the next overlap with my vertical, and do the double depth pleat as that wraps around. And squash the new twist, just making sure in here that everything is happy being where it is. Going in with the bone folder, making extra certain of that. Ah, that's why it's not happy. This mountain is not on the grid line. And then flipping over, I've got a whole closed twist to set up. And then I may as well finish out this corner while I'm here. The shortest plate that has something is going to have a very partial open square twist. And I know exactly where it goes because I know exactly where that edge needs to lay down. And then I can come in here. I need to open really everything up. I do have another overlap to reverse, and I get a whole closed square twist. And then flipping over, I get another partial open twist, and that's going to complete my corner. So apparently I did do exactly the same thing as my demo. So I'll leave the other 3 corners for you to do exactly like I just did. They're all exactly the same. There's no extra interactions with other sides because the pleats don't go that far, or rather we don't have enough grid for that. And I'm going to show you a variation and then a preview of the rest of the series. So if you can do a flagstone square tessellation with the normal open square, why not do it with the double open square? So notice that there are 2 grid spacings around this big square in the center of the twist, and our closed squares are further apart. So there's all kinds of options. You can use whatever square you want on the flagstone side. I would just say don't use a closed square. That's just a little bit too dense. But you can do double open, triple open, whatever open you prefer. And then the next video next week is going to talk about how to use isoarea square twists to get flagstone tessellations, and you can really use this in a variety of ways. And you can even have things that are flagstone on both sides. Then we're going to talk about the triangles flagstone, and here I just have a demo of them spaced further apart, but it's closed hexagons and open triangles, and you just space them closer together to get those triangles in the center, the corners at the center, central hole. Same thing with hexagons and triangles. You can take this alternating closed triangle open hexagon on opposite sides at tube pleat spacing tessellation and just shunk, put everything one spacing closer together. It is going to require some slightly different techniques to get everything working, but it's a fun one. After that, we'll combine hexagons and triangles in a flagstone, and notice that I'm using open triangle twists here, which means I need to be using double open hexagons to match the edge. So the normal open hexagon matches with the closed triangle, but I did not want to have a closed triangle hole here, and so we're going to be using the double open hexagon. And then we're going to talk about rhombi, starting with just rhombi, the six-fold rotationally symmetric arrangement of rhombus twists. And this one, despite its name, does not only have rhombus twists, it also has hexagons and triangles. Then we're going to talk about two other arrangements of rhombi. This one I call aligned rhombi, where they're all pointing in the same direction. And this one I call chevron rhombi because they're coming up next to each other, pointing in different directions. And you can take the techniques of these last three and combine them to have hexagons, 6 rhombi coming from the center, and then a block of 4 of them neighbored by another block of 4 of them in a different orientation. And you'll have the 3 corners coming together. They're at the corners of those larger blocks. And that is basically the cube's flagstone tessellation from Peter Keller that someone asked me to teach, and it would not have fit in an hour time slot. So instead, we're doing an 8-part series to build up the skills necessary to fold that tessellation. So that is all for today. I hope that you give this tessellation a try, and maybe use a 16-fold grid to start. You don't have to start with 24 divisions like I had, but practice small and then build up to it. So I'll make sure to put the links that I mentioned in the description below. Happy folding, and I will see you next week.